Hello and welcome to another video on real-time interview questions on QA profile. So this is the continuation video of the Selenium interview questions which we have discussed in the previous videos. So let's continue with our questions. So the next question is, what is synchronization? So when you are using the automation tool, we have the concept of the synchronization. So they just want to check if you are aware of this synchronization concept. So let's see in detail what this synchronization concept basically is. So when you try to automate any of the web application, we have two components here. First is automation tool which you are using, and the other is the application which you are testing. So each of these has their own phase of running. So application under test will load at its own speed, and the automation tool will also take its own speed to launch. So in the synchronization concept, we want to make sure that both this automation tool and the application under test, those two should be in sync so that our test will run smooth. So that is the concept of the synchronization. So you can see it is the mechanism that involves two or more components that work parallelly with each other. So here the components are automation tool and the application under test. So these two should work parallel to each other so that the test can run smoothly without any failures. In the test automation, we have two components, that is the application under test and the test automation tool. So both components have their own speed, and to make these two components move in the same and the desired speed, we should write our script in such a way we will not encounter element not found errors. So we always need to make sure that both this automation tool and the application under test will move with the same speed so that it will not face any of the errors in finding our web elements. So for doing so, we have to design our scripts in such a way to make these two run in parallel. So this is all about the synchronization, and we have two categories of synchronization. So that is unconditional and the conditional. So they might ask you what is conditional synchronization and what is unconditional synchronization. So let's see them as well. So the first is unconditional synchronization. So what you do in this unconditional synchronization is, the name itself says you doesn't add any of the condition. So what it does is it works globally for any of the web elements. So that means it is applicable globally for all the web elements. So the examples are like wait and the thread.sleep. So when you keep this thread.sleep in your script, you are just saying that it has to wait. So you are not defining any condition here. You are just saying it straightforward. Just wait for this particular time. When you say thread.sleep of 5000, then it will wait for the 5 seconds in our script without checking for any of the condition. So that is why it is called the unconditional synchronization. We do have the disadvantage of using this, because when you use this, even though the application is ready, let's say if you are trying to find any of the web element and that web element is already available, but this will wait even though that is available, because you doesn't keep a condition for this to check. It doesn't have any condition to check if the web element is available or not. It just keeps on waiting until the time you have defined. So even though the web element is available, it will keep on waiting for the time which you have defined and then proceed with the execution. So this will add up the execution time for us in our test scripts. So that is one of the disadvantages of this unconditional synchronization. So next we have conditional synchronization. In conditional synchronization, unlike the unconditional ones, we are saying the condition. So we are specifying the condition, wait until this condition is met. So examples for this are like implicit wait and the explicit wait. So what we are doing is, so here we are setting the timeout value in the conditional synchronization as the tool should proceed further, instead of making the tool to wait for the particular condition to satisfy. So in conditional synchronization, when the condition is met, before the time we have specified, it will proceed with the execution instead of waiting for that time. So in this way, the script is not taking the longer time, unlike the unconditional synchronization. So let's see what the implicit wait and the explicit wait in detail. So these are the types of waits in Selenium. So this is also one of the most asked common questions in the interviews, which is what are the different types of waits you have in Selenium. So the answer for this is we have three different types of waits in Selenium. Is implicit wait, and then we have the explicit wait, and the last is the fluent wait. So what is implicit wait? Implicit wait tells the driver to wait before throwing the exception like no such element or element not visible. Wait until the stated time. So that means it is telling the WebDriver to wait before throwing the exception. So we will be defining the time under this implicit wait, and the WebDriver will wait for that particular time before throwing any of the exception. And the format for writing the implicit wait is driver.manage.timeouts.implicit wait of type, time units dot second. So here if you say time as 10 and the time units is second, it will wait for the 10 seconds here. And if you say like time unit dot millisecond, it will wait for the 10 millisecond. So this is the format for using the implicit wait. The next one is explicit wait. In the explicit wait, before throwing the exception, you tell the WebDriver to wait for the specific condition to meet. So unlike the implicit wait, in the implicit wait, what we are doing is telling the WebDriver to wait for that particular time. But in the explicit wait, we are also adding the condition to wait until that particular condition is met. So we are adding a condition here. So for declaring the explicit wait, we will make use of the WebDriver wait. So we will write it as WebDriver wait equals to new WebDriver wait of driver, time span from seconds, and we will define the time here, and then we define the condition which it has to check. So wait dot until expected conditions dot visibility of element located by that element ID. So here what we are doing is we are telling the WebDriver to wait until it finds this web element which we have defined. So it will wait for that particular 30 seconds, and in that particular 30 seconds it will check if it is able to find that web element. If it found that web element, it will continue with the execution. If not, it will wait for that particular time which we have defined. So let's see the difference between the explicit wait and the implicit. So the main difference is that explicit wait will make the WebDriver wait for a particular web element for the specified time, whereas in the implicit wait, it will make the WebDriver wait for all the web elements for the time which we have specified. When you take this application and if you define the implicit wait in your script, that implicit wait is applicable to all the web elements of this page. So it is applicable to this Google button, login with the phone or email ID button. So it is applicable to all the web elements of the application. But when you consider the explicit wait, we are defining the condition for which it has to wait. So for example, we are telling wait until this Google button is loaded. So that means this explicit wait is applicable only for this Google button. It is not applicable for login with phone button, and it is not applicable for the search button. Even though this search is not loaded and the Google button is loaded, the condition we have specified is met and it will go on with the execute. So this is the main difference between the explicit wait and implicit. In simple, explicit wait is applicable only for one specific web element, whereas implicit wait is applicable for all the web elements in the application. Next we have the fluent wait. So let's see what is fluent wait in Selenium. Let me explain the common scenario where you will be using the fluent wait. So this is our make my trip application. So here you can see we have the pop-up sign in. So when the application is loaded, you can see the pop-up sign in with the Google or the phone number. But let's say in our application we get this pop-up only for the few times. So sometimes we might not get this pop-up, but we are not sure when this happens. So in that case, we can make use of the fluent wait in Selenium to perform any action on this web element. So if it finds that web element, it will perform that action, and if it doesn't find this pop-up, the script will throw the exception for us. So we can ignore that exception in the fluent wait. So ignoring the exception is the most common used scenario for the fluent wait. Fluent wait is used to define maximum time for the WebDriver to wait for the condition, as well as the frequency with which it has to check for the condition before throwing the exception. So in the fluent wait, it has also provided us with the facility of setting the frequency which it has to check for the condition if it is met or not. So that is what we call as polling time in the fluent wait, and it will check for that particular web element at the regular intervals until that object is found or the timeout happens. So we can define it as wait equals to new fluent wait of driver with timeout, and we'll be defining the time for which it has to wait for, and then time units dot the seconds or minutes or anything, and then the polling every. So here we are telling the polling time. So when you say it as 5 seconds, so under this 30 seconds, for every 5 seconds, it will go and check in the application if it is able to find that web element. If it is able to find the web element, it will go on, and if it is not able to find, it will wait for another more 5 seconds, and again if it checks for that condition. And if it is not able to find the condition, then we can ignore the exception in the fluent wait using this ignoring no such element exception dot class. So we can define the exception which we want to ignore here. So this is the format for writing the fluent wait in Selenium. So this is one of the other question related to the Selenium waits. So it is, what is default polling time for explicit wait and the implicit? So in the fluent wait, we have seen we can define the polling time for ourselves in this polling every. But for the explicit wait and the implicit wait, we can't have the user defined polling time, but we have by default some polling time. So that is, for the explicit wait, we have the 500 milliseconds as the polling time by default, and implicit wait doesn't have any of the polling time. So that means for the explicit wait, for every 500 milliseconds, it will go and check if the condition is met or not. But for the implicit wait, we doesn't have any condition in the implicit wait first. So that is why it doesn't have any of the polling time, and it will wait completely for the time which we have defined. And next we have what is difference between set sleep and sleep. So this is also one of the most asked questions. So we need to understand what is difference between sleep and the set sleep. So under this unconditional synchronization, we have discussed we can set the thread.sleep to wait until particular time. So here the question is, what is difference between this sleep and the set sleep? First is that the both are used to delay the execution speed. So that is common. We can use both of them to delay our test script execution. But the difference is that when you use the set sleep method with the time of 10 seconds, this delay of 10 seconds will be applicable to each and every Selenium operation we have in our test script. So when you set it as set speed of 5000, it will wait for 5 seconds for each and every Selenium operation. Whereas when you set the sleep of 5000, it will wait for 5 seconds only for that particular line and not for each and every Selenium operation. So that is the main difference. So set sleep is applicable globally for all the Selenium operations, whereas sleep method is applicable only for the specific operation which we have defined. So the next question we have is how to make sure the page is loaded using the Selenium. So let's consider this application, and we want to make sure every time when the page is loaded, all the web elements of this page are also loaded. So what are the conditions we have to add in our script to make sure this is happening? So that can be done when we add both implicit wait and the explicit wait. So first what we'll do is define the implicit wait so that it will wait for all the web elements of the application, and later along with that we'll be adding the explicit wait so that it will wait for that particular web element which we want to load. So that is what we have defined here. We have Selenium dot wait for page to load of 5 seconds. So what it checks is that it will wait for the page to load for 5 seconds, and then we can use two methods to do that. First is by checking for the particular web element and making use of the set speed and thread dot sleep to wait for that particular web element, and the other is we can make use of the explicit wait to wait for that particular web element. So you can use either explicit wait or the set speed and thread dot sleep to wait for each and every web element to load in the application. So let's stop here for this video and let's continue the remaining questions in the coming up videos. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you learned something new today. If you find this video helpful, please like and share it with your friends, and please do subscribe for more content like this.